Okay, AP Psychology students, welcome back from your break. I hope you'll like where we're starting the new year here. We're going to start with Unit 3, Section 2. This is the second half of Unit 3 on the College Board, actually the first part of Unit 3, because if you remember, we went out of order and did learning first. We're going to work on developmental psychology, and I think this image here is going to help you understand that developmental psychologists track from, actually we could even go before you're born, right, all the way until you die. And they're looking at what's going on across our lifespan. So in this video today, I want to talk about the projects you're going to work on in this unit, go over the assignments that you have for week 17, and then we're going to talk about maybe what kind of questions do you think developmental psychologists try to ask. And in this, it's a good time to review our research methods. We're also going to add in 2 ways that we study this topic of longitudinal and cross-sectional studies. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about what is normal development, what is normal behavior, and then do a few College Board practice questions, not too many because we're just starting. So first, I just want you to take a look at this statement for this unit, is that we're still going to be talking about cognitive psychology, but this time we're going to talk about it in more of how does it develop, right? So how do the behavioral and mental processes change over the course of a person's life? We're going to look at prenatal development, motor development, socialization or social development, cognitive development, language development, and then kind of what are some challenges of adolescence and adulthood, especially later adulthood. All right, so this will have the biological, cognitive, and cultural perspective. We're going to talk about when development is kind of in stages or continuous. That's going to come up a lot. And like I said, we've come across these ideas of cross-sectional research and longitudinal research. If you want kind of a big overview of this, ignore the Unit 9 part. Obviously, the units have been all reorganized with. So we're going to start with types of studies. That's where we're going to start, just a little bit here. And then as we go through, let me just double check this first week. We're going to, again, work on the research of it. You're going to do the prenatal and motor development, the cognitive development, and language development. All right, so these are the 3 that we're starting with in week 17. Then in week 18, you're going to look at social development. Also, parenting styles is kind of interesting. Moral development. There's a really cool video on Baby Lab. I'll get to that in week 18. And then week 19, we're going to finish. So we're going to spend 3 weeks on development. And one of the things that is going to be ongoing, and I just want you, it's in the first week here is for you to read it. It's not going to be due till the end of the unit, but I have it brought up here. It's called A Timeline of My Life. And if we remember, the best way to learn something is to rehearse it elaboratively or in a way that connects to you. And I've had students write me and tell me that they kind of set this aside and then they looked at it years later. So you can create this project using anything that you want. There's some ideas here, Prezi, Canva, like use something kind of interesting. I really don't want to see another PowerPoint or just a document. So it's supposed to be something that you can be creative with. And as you learn about the theories from Piaget, Kohlberg, Erikson, I know you don't know who they are yet, but as you learn about these things, it's a good idea to add them to your project so this isn't something you're doing at the very end. Also gives you some time maybe to get some pictures or to think about your life. So like I said, don't try to do this right now, but also don't wait till the end of the unit. So it will have a title, right? Your name, a timeline of Emily Hinman's life, right? You could also have a subtitle. It's going to have a beginning for you, right? When and where were you born? Who are your parents? What culture were you born into? Brothers and sisters? Kind of, is there any circumstances at the beginning of your life that really influenced your development? And then you're going to have kind of the first decade, since we have so much going on in there, we're going to break up the first decade into 2 sections. And then obviously you're not through 10 through 20, but you're going to start to make predictions. So from 20 until your death, you're going to think about how you develop, what kind of planning for your future, what kinds of things do you think will happen. Also, throwing in there what you see happening in the stages of life. All right, so consider some questions here, what you must include, right? So the stages, it has an example here of Erikson, but I want you to include all the stages and some events. So at least 3 events that you think are going to happen. You can have multimedia things if you want. And then at the very ending, what are people going to say, right? If somebody was going to speak at your funeral, what would they be saying about you, right? I know you cannot predict the future. So just have a little bit of fun with this, practice the theories. And like I said, lots of students like to hold on to this and open it up later. So that's what we're doing. That is the kind of the overview of developmental psychology. If we look at the College Board just real quick here, you'll see these sections, right? So you can also open these sections up on the College Board page, and you can watch the videos that they have if you would like. Just quickly, I like this picture. This kind of is another way of helping us see. We don't have this man as a boy, but if we continued this out and saw all the pictures up to where he started, this teacher took the same picture for 40 years in a row in the same outfit, so you can see. And I always I don't know how many of you have ever said this or do this, but my children often say, oh, I can't wait until I can do this, or I can't wait until I can do that. And making years in the future. And I always say, well, don't waste your life, or don't waste your life away, right? And it's kind of like, if we look at adult, this is 40 years of work and being an adult. And you only have, a little bit of time to be a baby, very little bit of time. You get a little bit longer to be a child. You have very few years of being a teenager, and then you're an adult for a really long time. So try to think about the things that you can still do as a teenager that maybe you won't be doing as an adult. All right, so after we get through this slide, I want you to pause this video, and I want you to go to the discussion on the course page before we go over these questions. Oops, I'm going to bring it back up. You will see there's a discussion that says, what questions might developmental psychologists ask? So from this point in the video, to stop and 3 to 5 questions. What do you think a developmental psychologist is going to study? What are they researching? And then take a minute to think about how might they research one of your. So maybe my question is, I think developmental psychologists will study how language develops. And so how are they going to study this, right? And so they might have to qualitatively, maybe they just start to write down everything that adults say, right? And then maybe they do they're looking at this long term, so they see these are what the adults say when they're at this age, and then this is how adults talk to them when they're older, right? But some ideas you have about how one of your questions is discussed, and then you can make a question or a comment on a classmate's posting to finish that discussion. All right, so and when you're done writing in your questions, then you can come back and finish the video. So just pause it for a second and then come back. All right, so I can't look at all the questions that you might have asked, but I want to go through some sample questions that I've had before, or things they think research, and then these things that come up all the time for developmental psychologists. So how cultural and environmental affect temperament, right? So, well, first you're going to have to learn what temperament is. Right? Temperament is kind of the tendencies we're born with, maybe how open we are to new experiences, how likely we are to try something new, right? So all of those things. And what's more important, our culture, our environment, our birth, what affects temperament? How does nutrition affect brain development? What are key milestones? When do they occur? What are cultural moral rules that affect how adult morals and how they change? How does language acquiescence progress through development? What effect does diet have on mental development? You can see all these different kinds of questions that my students have come up with in the past. And if we take all of these questions, we can often come back. We've seen nature and nurture over and over again, right? So how does our genetic inheritance, our nature, and our experience, our nurture, influence our behavior? This is going to come up in almost all the questions that developmental psychologists ask. Also, is stability and change, right? Do our early personality traits persist through life, or do we become different persons as we age, right? So as we go through developmental psychologists are going to say, what stays the same? What changes? And we're also going to see that they're constantly interested in this continuity versus stages. So is development gradual, or do we kind of progress through these different stages? Can we jump back and forth between stages? Or is it just like one, like walking up a flight of steps, we're just going to keep going steadily? Or are there big jumps, right? And I think you can see that in your own development of, maybe I couldn't walk, I kind of stumbled down, and then once you got it, you just keep going, right? So these are the big issues that face developmental psychologists, or kind of form the background of all of their questions. All right, now, how might we study these questions? Well, remember we've talked about this before. We have descriptive, right, where we're just going to observe and record. These are our case studies, our surveys, our observations. Remember, nothing is manipulated in those things, and it's going to help us a lot of times when we just kind of want to see what's going on, right? Correlational, we studied these. Remember, we're only we're trying to predict things, and we're measuring things that are already there. We're not manipulating anything. And at last, we have our experiments where we're trying to manipulate, right? Like maybe I'm asking the question, can I help a child learn to crawl faster? All right, so I'm going to show the parents some exercises to do with the children, and I'm going to have two groups, right? One group is going to be just playing with their parents on the floor, and the other group is going to have a set of exercises to do it. So I'm manipulating the exercises the child does, and I'm measuring at what age they start to crawl, right? So that would be experimental. Now, we can take these methods, descriptive, correlational, experimental, and we can further kind of look at them in two different ways. One is called cross-sectional, and the other is called longitudinal. Cross-sectional, we're going to have different sources of people, but we're measuring them at just one time. So I am looking at, let's say I'm going to survey a whole bunch of parents, and they're going to have kids who are 2, kids who are 8, kids who are 14, and children who are 18, right? And I'm doing it all at the same time, and I'm still trying to see what are the differences between ages, but I have different people in my study, right? So I'm measuring it at the same time. Longitudinal means I just have one source, right? So I just have a set of 2-year-olds, but I'm going to measure that same set of 2-year-olds when they're 2, when they're 8, when they're 16. It could be more, right? But the idea is I'm going to follow them for a long part of their life. Now, I think you can imagine that this comes with some strengths and weaknesses, right? The advantage of a cross-sectional is it's much less expensive. I can do it all at once, and attrition means I don't lose the people in my study, right? Because I'm just taking different groups and I'm comparing them at one time. I'm not likely to lose, right, the people in my group. The disadvantages, different age groups are not necessarily much alike, and the differences may be due to cohort differences rather than age. What does that mean? Cohort differences. Well, think about how we label millennials, Gen Z, Gen X, boomers, right? The cohort is that there's a difference in when you grow up. And those cultural differences of when you grow up mean that it's not so much about inherent to the person as it is to the culture. So we have to be very careful about seeing whether there's a difference between our groups, what we're trying to measure, or is it just different between our groups because they're from different time periods, right? And then you can see that if we're looking at longitudinal, it's the same people. It has the advantages of we're only measuring in those people, right? We get rid of those cohort differences, but it's really expensive. It's really time consuming. And the attrition is we can just lose people. It's very hard to study people over time. And then we also have maybe our assessment tools can be the difference or not the age, right? We bring into this variable that we're measuring them at different times instead of measuring it all at once. So we can see that both cross-sectional and longitudinal studies need to be done as best they can together to understand why we have differences at different ages. And finally, I wanted to talk about kind of normal development. And this is, and maybe talk to your parents, or if you have siblings or something, we can see that many things happen, right, at different ages, and we kind of expect certain things to happen at different ages. And we have ranges, right? So I can tell you that my children all crawled rather late, right? If we say crawling kind of happens at beginning around 8 months, right? And then the end maybe by 12, I can tell you that my children didn't all crawl at that age. One never crawled. She just kind of scooted across on her butt, and she never really crawled. And they all walked rather late, right? They weren't really walking around 12 months. Many of my children didn't walk till 15 or 16 months. And so we get this wide range of what is normal. Same thing with maybe how we're talking, right? I know a little girl in our village. She is 2, and so at 2, I would be expecting her to have multiple word sayings, right? But her mother speaks Hungarian, her father speaks Croatian. They speak English when they speak to each other because the mother doesn't speak Croatian and the father doesn't speak Hungarian. And so the little girl is needing more time to learn to speak, right? Because she's sorting out all these different languages. So when we talk about normal development, we really need to understand there is a progression, right? Baby is going to learn to hold their head up, and then they're going to learn to crawl, and then they're going to tend to learn to walk and run. But it doesn't necessarily mean it all happens at the same time, and we always need to think about what's going on with the child. So another good example is babies who are with mothers who carry them on their back a lot, maybe because they have to work in fields. Those babies do not see mothers' faces as much, and they will not speak as early as somebody who is having looking at a face all the time. During COVID, when people were wearing face masks, it was terrible for speech development. You could actually see the delay in many children because they didn't have, they weren't able to watch faces. So we do have just to kind of summarize, we have a progression in our development in different areas. We have kind of what we would expect to be normal within a range, but we always need to kind of look at the circumstances that might change that range. All right, so last here is to practice some questions. I'm just going to put these up for a second. I'm going to put the answers in the assignment so that you can just answer them first, and then you can check your answers when you're done. So pause this until you answer, and then start again. Here's the second one. Go ahead and pause until you answer. Third one. Fourth one. And the last one. And in the assignment where the video is posted, I'll post the answers to those 5. If you have any questions, let me know, and I hope this helped get you started with developmental psychology.